How many of us know the 3 T's when it comes to stewardship? Anyone?
Time.
The 3 T's.
Time.
Time.
Talent and treasure.
Treasure. Yeah. Did you know there's a 4th T? Testimony. Just as there are many verses, scriptures in the Bible about stewardship, there are also many individual stories about stewardship also. So that's what we're going to be bringing you this morning. Pastor Rick asked a few of us to come forward and give our testimony as to stewardship and how we've applied that and how that has been applied to our lives. A couple of us were not able to make it this morning, but we do have 2 individuals that will speak. So at this time, I'd like to invite Chris Allen up for his testimony.
Yeah, maybe you can hear me better now. Flip it on up here. He was diagnosed with pneumonia. He was wheezing, and her sister, who lives in the area, came over, took him to the hospital, and they took a x-ray, and he had some fluid in his lungs and was diagnosed with pneumonia. And so the doctor said, we're going to have to keep him for 2 or 3 days. And Lynn said, should I fly in? I said, he's 97 years old. You need to fly in. Everything is serious when you're 97 in his shape. So she's in with him. She did send me a text and say he's doing better this morning. Last night when they took him in, they hooked him up to an IV, and he pulled everything out. And it was bleeding all over. And her sister had to explain to him what all this was about. And with dementia, sometimes he remembers, sometimes he doesn't. But he's doing much better this morning. So I'm sure Lynn would have liked to have been here. She is supposed to speak, so I've got to fill her gap of time here. My story starts about tithing, about stewardships. Starts as a 17-year-old student. I went to church with a friend. I'd been with him a couple times. And it's June, July, and I'm looking around and seeing the air conditioning and the lights, and I thought, I don't want to be beholden to anybody. I'm going to give money. So I gave $5 a week, simply because I felt like I needed to help defer expenses that I was helping to incur. And later that summer, I made a decision at the age of 17 to become a Christian, and I was baptized and continued to give my $5 a week as a student. Now, the first time in church I heard a sermon about tithing and about stewardship, I didn't even know what it was, to be honest with you. But they talked about bringing your tithes to the storehouse and that you should give 10% of your income to the church, and I immediately grabbed onto the back of the pew and I said, nobody's getting 10% of my income. That's not happening. Well, those of you that are math majors have figured out I was already given 10% of my income. And once I realized that and thought about it, I thought, I do need to, as a Christian, I do need to give. And I've later learned that stewardship is about more than giving money. It's about a generous heart. It's about giving a lot of things, your time, talent, treasure. So I continued to do that. You fast forward several years, I'm a single parent with custody of 4 kids. Lynn's a single parent with custody of 2 kids. And we meet and we dated and we decided to get married, and we decided that we were going to tithe to the church. as a, the newlyweds. We continued to do that. And I don't even remember, quite frankly, but it doesn't matter if 10% before taxes or after taxes, but we gave to the church. And my oldest went to college, and the next year our two girls went to college, and we had 3 kids in college. And Lynn and I sat down, we looked at our budget, and we thought, there's no way. We could either tell the kids they can't have a car, we can't pay for college, but we can't do everything. So we stopped tithing to church, and we reduced the amount that we were giving to church out of necessity. We had to. We had 5 cars at the time. I think our car insurance bill was as much as our house payment at the time. And lo and behold, the nominating committee comes to me and says, will you be chair of finance and stewardship? Oh, well, this is not a good time to ask me to be chair of finance and stewardship, because I'm not given enough to keep the doors open at this point in time. And I said, let me take a day or two and think about it and pray about it. And as I began to think about it, I thought, well, this is a way I can give. I have the talent, I have the time available to do it, and this is a way I can give. So even though I wasn't a strong giver at that point, I decided I should be the chair of stewardship and finance. And in a lot of churches, those two positions are separated. In the smaller churches, they usually go together. And I just felt like it was something I needed to do. I can remember getting up in front of the church. That summer, we'd built a new building. We'd moved from a small church, which Best Buy ended up buying from us and gave us a lot of money, and we built a big new church. And it was August of that year, and we've got probably 150 yards of sod laid around the church, and we've got to water it all or it's going to die. And I'm sitting here looking at the budget, and I'm thinking, we don't know what utilities are going to be in this new building. We don't know what our water bill is going to be. We don't know anything. So I stood up in front of the church and I said, just relayed my concerns to the church about we don't know what our expenses are going to be in a new building. And a couple of people, unbeknownst to me, and I wasn't asking for money, ended up putting a $1,000 check in the plate to defer some of those expenses. So I learned a valuable lesson. If you have needs, you need to let people know about it, because they're not going to have any way to help or to give or to even pray about it if you don't share that information with them. So I was a little bit shocked at what had happened. We were probably 230 member church. We're not small, but I was surprised to hear that happen. So I learned a valuable lesson out of that. As time went on, Lynn and I have always, once we got our kids through college, we have continued to go back to tithing. It's just a part of our life, and something that it's usually when we sit down annually to do our budget, it's the first thing that we look at is, what are we going to give to church? And our giving's changed a lot over the years. Being older now, we typically don't give cash. We just give stock, and it's a once a year type thing, but it's still a very important part of our life. And to be honest with you, when we started tithing as a young married couple, Lynn is working as an administrator at the county, and I'm a technical sales guy, and we weren't making a lot of money. We really weren't. God blessed us. We could ever expect through the years. I would give even more, because what I have given has come back to me tenfold. So I would encourage you to consider it if you haven't. But really, it's just about giving, period. Giving of your time. I can't sing, but if I could, I'd be up there singing. And Lynn loves to sing, so she's up there singing. Give of your time. Help us out any way you can. And that's really what stewardship is all about. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think my stewardship story starts about 5 or 6 years before Chris. Chris mentioned he was around 17 or 18 years old. Everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me now? Okay. I think my first formal introduction to stewardship was when I was around 12 or 13 years old. It was shortly after my church confirmation classes when all of us were welcomed deeper into our Lutheran faith. As part of that process, we were introduced with the adults in the congregation in receiving a box of offering envelopes for the upcoming year. How proud I was to see my name among all those rows and rows and neatly stacked boxes to be handed out to the members. How more proud I was when I pulled out that first offering envelope for the week 1 of the new year, put it in my offering, and dropped it into the offering plate as it was passed. Weeks and months passed, and pretty soon we were coming up to the last few weeks of the year. Thinking back at that time, I remember there were quite a few envelopes from earlier weeks still in my box. I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was then that I learned my first lesson about giving back to Jesus. I knew about Jesus, but I didn't know Jesus. Offering or stewardship was just an act of pulling out an envelope, ideally every week, dropping in some loose change or leftover allowance found in a desk drawer, and putting it in the offering plate. But it was a start. Taking time to really itemize the things I was grateful for didn't occur to me until many years later, as did knowing that giving is what God asks of me, not out of compulsion, but out of compassion. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 says, God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. Being so young, I didn't notice or think about the variety of gifts members freely shared with others every day. Giving on Sunday afternoons, bringing communion to shut-ins, teaching Sunday school, spending time every week cleaning the church, offering to go out of your way to pick up a friend who isn't able to drive, or simply holding a door open for someone. Regular people, just letting God use them, showing one person at a time that they care. Often all it takes is for someone to feel God's love is a little bit of attention. When all of us offer to serve, everyone benefits. I believe one thing that has kept Pam and me faithful in our giving is that, for the most part, we've been on the same page when it comes to stewardship. Both being raised in the church, we had an understanding of how important stewardship is. There are a couple of people in our former church that are not with us this morning, but they would remember us seeing Pam and me and our 4 very young kids in church just about every Sunday. We'd take up the entire back pew with all the kids in various poses, ready to beat a hasty retreat if one started getting loud or acting out of line. But usually Pam's glare would bring them back into line. Getting ready to head to church fell into a never-changing routine. Do you have the diaper bag? Do you have the blankets? Do you have their bottle? Do you have the pacifier? And finally, do you have the check? I must admit there were several Sundays where I'd have to run back inside and find the checkbook. During those early years and ever since, we've been truly blessed in that we've, except for a couple of occasions, always had jobs. We're grateful that we've always been content and made do with what we had, which always seemed more than enough. We've never had to make difficult decisions about our spending or finances. Oftentimes, it's very easy just to write the check. But in some ways, that can be a curse or a trap. When I look at my year-end contribution statement, I might think I did fairly well in my giving. But is that the best and only measure of my stewardship? I need to stop and measure my sacrificial giving. I may be increasing my monetary giving, but am I giving as much spiritually? Do I come close to measuring up to the widow's offering in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12? Would Jesus praise me in the same manner he praised her? How would I answer if I was asked, what would the condition of the church be if everyone gave spiritually the same as I gave? I think the answer becomes self-evident when we admit to ourselves, if God owns everything, we own nothing. We're just the caretakers, stewards of God's abundant gifts. How much are we holding back? Why are we holding back if it doesn't belong to us, if it's not ours to begin with? Do I truly believe and have faith that God will provide? I know that I have a lot to do in this area, not being possessed by what I think are my possessions. One final lesson I want to share, and what I want to take more to heart, is found in Matthew, chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When someone says to me, thank you for a gift or a service I provided, I usually simply say, you're welcome. But I need to start giving the credit to God, who owns it all. I'm only his steward, entrusted with his gifts to help others. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, we read, so let's not get tired of doing what is good, and just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. My reward is the feeling I get every time I walk through these doors, where my attitude changes and stresses and concerns are washed away, replaced by the presence of God's Holy Spirit. When we, in awesome wonder, consider all the worlds his hands have made, we see the stars, we hear the rolling thunder, his power throughout the universe displayed. How great thou art. How great thou art. Amen.